Hi, I'm Spencer Ziegler.
Hi, I'm Mellisa Smith, and welcome to Data Lit, a podcast for educators by educators. So we have been having these interesting discussions around engagement and how to engage students. And I came across this article where I liked the title. I think it was Making Schools Worth Kids' Time. So making sure that kids find that school is worthwhile. And it kind of got me thinking about, how did I think about school when I started? So Spencer, when you were younger, what was the reason you were told why you needed school?
Yeah, I guess because that's where the information was, Like there are these gatekeepers, like that's where the teachers were that were deliberate. That's where the books were, we've talked about the encyclopedia set where I can go to, V to get to Mount Vesuvius.
Yep.
That's where the one computer lab was. So that was the only option. Like if you wanted to learn, you go to school for that.
Yeah, it's the same here. Like I often hear people say, you went to school to get an education. That is where education lived.
Right. Yes.
Education was this thing that you caught, and it was only caught in school.
Yeah.
And so that was a very clear message. And if you wanted to do better in life, you needed to go to school to get said education.
Yep. Only option.
That was your only option. However, at an NC Ties conference recently, the presenter was talking about the young people in front of us right now. That is not necessarily the case. Like they can be educated outside of school. So he talked about this YouTube generation and that, I use YouTube. I go on and I learn different things on YouTube. But it struck me that I know a time before YouTube, whereas we are having a lot of kids, they don't know a time outside of YouTube, that is a place.
That is wild.
I know. That is a place to get information, I would say, but they would see it as a place to get education. And I see those two things as differently. And so we kind of have to consider that. Like you don't need school to get an education. Now that is a very hard thing for me to kind of sit with as an educator.
Yeah. And I think there's a qualifier there. Yeah, you don't need school to get information. Now, useful information, valid information, reliable information, there's some kind of questions there. And even then you don't need school to get all those things.
Right. School is not the only place.
Yeah.
And I think when we were growing up, it seemed like that was the place.
Right. It's this transition from when we were growing up, there was a dearth of information at our disposal. And so you had to go to school to get access to it. Whereas now it's flipped all the way to the other extreme where now there's a surplus of information, some useful, some not, some healthy, some not. And so school is a little different and the competition is a little bit different.
Yeah. All right. So let me ask you this question. It's a data question. What do you think is the absenteeism rate in North Carolina? And I'm defining it as chronic absenteeism, which is the percentage of kids that missed at least 10% or more of schooling. What do you think our rate is at?
Okay. In North Carolina, it's funny too, because we talked about this a while back and I had the number, but now I lost it. But I don't know.
Make a guess.
15%.
No. So that used to be our rates. Our rates used to hover around 15, 16% before the pandemic. But since the pandemic, they have risen. Our rate as of the 22-23 school year is 27%. 27. That means 27% of our K-12 students miss 10% or more of school. And the number is dropping slightly. I think the year prior was in the 30s.
Sure.
But it's still concerning.
Right.
And again, that is something not just in the state, but in our district, we're trying to hone in. We need kids in school. We need kids. We as adults think, we need kids in school. Yeah. I think when you ask kids, they think they don't need to be in school.
Yeah.
And we're wrestling with this notion of why do kids need to be in school? I think even with some parents would disagree, right? Why do kids need to be in school? And, that is how we are defining engagement as do kids show up or not show up? And we seem to be in an era where we have to try and reconvince ourselves as to why kids need to be in school. There's this article that I found from the World Economic Forum that I guess asked students about their perceptions about whether school is preparing them or not, right? Because again, we're talking about the purpose of school, and the purpose of school is to provide them with an education. And so that, asking kids their perception of, is school doing the thing for you? Is it preparing you for the world? What percent of kids you think said that they think schools are currently preparing them for the world?
I'm going to say it's 50-50.
No. 34% of our kids.
This said that it was.
34% of our kids believe schools are not preparing them.
Okay. So that was too pessimistic. Okay.
Right. Are not preparing them. But that's like 1 in 3 kids.
Which, interesting, that's similar rate to the, chronic absenteeism rate, which is kind of fascinating.
Yes. And so, kids are thinking that schools are not preparing them. We look at this article talking about, is school even worthwhile? And the answer to that is yes. And how do we make that worthwhile? And what you and I have been dabbling in is we think it comes through looking at the 4 C's. And even though the 4 C's are not content topics, right? They're not like math and ELA. There is something to be said about preparing our kids for the world out there, making them employable. And we think that can be done through the 4 C's.
Yeah. And I'll add that, and it's not like it's just you and I with this idea. Like the state just in the last couple months, and we'll drop a link in the show notes, just received a $4 million Skills for the Future grant from the U.S. Department of Education, which is, it's this part of this national effort to measure and incorporate durable skills into our schooling, with competencies needed for success in college, careers, and life. And, North Carolina is tying it to the Portrait of Graduate, which includes, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, some other skills as well. But this similar kind of idea of school is different from when you and I were first kind of going through it. The skills needed for our kids to be employable, that's different.
Right. And so in addition, I think everybody's saying, in addition to them getting the core content, there are these, when I was growing up, we call them soft skills.
Yeah.
But I think they're more than just soft skills. I think they're definitely necessary skills that kids need to have to be employable. So we're going to talk about the 4 C's, which are critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. So as a recap, critical thinking, what's that?
Critical thinking, the ability to analyze information and engage in reflective and independent thinking, allowing students to evaluate claims and make informed decisions.
Right. So I think of that skill can happen in any of our classes.
Right.
K-12, right? This is not just critical thinking skills just for high schoolers. Right? Kindergartners have the ability to engage in critical thinking.
Yeah. And this one, like that transition that we discussed from dearth of information to a surplus of information, you need discernment for that. You need critical thinking to figure out what is useful, what is not. This era of AI where something might come to you, but you need to make sure that it is actually accurate, not hallucinating, and actually useful for the task because it is a computer at the other end. You need critical thinking. So this is one that I feel like has really ramped up in importance with each passing year.
I agree. Another one is one of my favorites, communication. So that one is about conveying information effectively across diverse audiences. So not just being able to speak or to have a conversation, but being able to do so effectively across diverse audiences, making it vital for both personal and professional contexts.
Yeah. And this one I think has also evolved just in that it's not just audiences, but to me it's mediums as well.
Oh, okay.
And choosing, and there's probably some critical thinking, you see how they overlap, but choosing the right medium for your purpose. Is this communication over a conversation, be it formal or informal? Is it something in writing? Is it through media? Is it, just what we're doing right now, thinking about a podcast, and each of these requires a slightly different approach to the communication and different skills. There might be some people that are really good in writing, but they need to work on their, interpersonal, whatever it might be. So this one's also increasingly complex.
And I see this one too, kind of like with critical thinking, where I think the importance of it is going to be increased just in the way, like when I interact with like my own child, the way they communicate, right? So it's always amazing to me whenever I say, and I talk to another parent over the weekend, when I say to my daughter, call so-and-so, and the look of fear, like I said, I was just like, I'm not asking you to call a stranger. I'm asking you to call a friend.
Yeah.
And the other parent was saying the same thing too. If you ever think about it, you never see young people on the phone talking or calling one another. They're usually just texting. And it's, the ability to communicate in that way, I think, again, different ways of communicating. So they are great with texting. Yeah. But the actual having the art of conversation about what to say to somebody. Yeah. The deer in headlights look is always amazing. They're like, oh my God, what am I going to say?
Yeah. And the inverse too, I hope that my mom is not listening to this, but her texting skills are not great. Not great, So
well, is she using long paragraphs with punctuation the way we were taught?
No, to be honest, it's the opposite. Oh. She tries to text like the youngins, and
it fails.
Yeah, it's not great.
And if she has autocorrect, I know.
Yeah. So it is like figuring out how to communicate, what's the right tool, what are the different rules in grammatical or all those kind of things. These are important skills.
Yep. All right. Another one is collaboration. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on collaboration?
Yeah. So the definition that we have down here is, the capacity to work effectively within teams, integrating diverse perspectives to achieve shared goals. And this, as I was preparing for this, I'm excited throughout the series, we're going to bring interviews of us talking with students. And this is the 4 C's that really struck me, that like, collaboration is not just 3 people at the same table. You need to be much more purposeful. It's not a division skill, just tasks divided by people, but more of a kind of HR skill. Like what are the strengths and weaknesses that we can kind of leverage in order to achieve a common goal? And a lot of when we're talking to students, they kind of push us, and we'll have clips in future episodes of more powerful collaboration, not just because kids are sitting down at the table, that doesn't mean it's good collaboration. That doesn't mean that they're getting the feedback and support that they need to improve in this area.
I notice that you use the word teams. And I think when you talk about a definition of collaboration, I think that's what makes the difference between collaboration is having them in teams, because teams have purpose and functions as opposed to putting them in groups.
Ooh, yeah, teams and groups. And then, like even just this podcast, like, I'm good with the geeky stuff. I take care of the editing. But if we need someone with, going back to communication, with, social skills, Melissa's going to be the one chatting with the guests, and setting those things up. And that's, part of that collaboration. Right. And this push and pull, when is it okay to lean on the other person? Yep. When is it appropriate for you to say like, no, you can talk to this person this time. And it's complicated.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then the last C, creativity, which involves, generating innovative ideas and approaches essential for problem solving and adapting to new situations. And I think, I've been reading some stuff about the purpose of schooling. Yeah. And I'm conflicted because growing up, the purpose of school is to get information, to be educated. So content mattered. Right. But I've been reading some stuff, especially like by James Baldwin, where is the purpose of school to do that, or is the purpose to raise citizens who question the world? And I would agree, it is to raise citizens who question the world. And if they're questioning the world, they're going to question the status quo. And to do that, they need to be innovative. They need to be able to problem solve. And that's where your creativity comes in. Yeah,
and that the novelty for this C, I think, is important. I've been thinking a lot of these, I probably brought it up too much, just in light of AI. Yeah. And, what are the skills that our kids will actually need for it to be employable, and what will computers do better? And AI is good at synthesizing things in the past. Yes. But by definition, it's not really future looking, because it's just looking at stuff that previously existed. But that ability to create something new and novel that is not just the mean of what is out there in the internet. Right. I think that is a hugely important skill.
And I think, again, we're going to see what does creativity look like in the age of AI is going to be important, because I think any users are going to have to realize that, again, it's not future looking. It is a synthesis of what happened in the past. Like, it's taking stuff from in the past and giving you that back.
Yeah.
And for us to be progressive, we're going to have to use it to spark that innovation, that creativity, to continuously be doing something new and different.
Yeah. If you need novel solutions to pernicious problems that we haven't been able to solve, you need that creativity.
Right.
Yeah.
Which humans, I'm going to advocate, can do better than AI.
Yes. Yes. And I think an example of a student, a kid, using these 4 C's in a way could come from actually what you heard at the very beginning of this episode. We have new theme music, which has come from Leesville Road High School student Will McElharney. And just you're thinking of just creating, not only did he create this music, but he actually published it. You can listen on Spotify, Apple Music, all that stuff, which is really cool. And you think about how he must have needed to use the creativity to make something new. Undoubtedly, there's collaboration. Nothing exists in a vacuum.
Right.
And then the
communication skills, right?
Yeah, to get it published. And critical thinking, just as you're using musical theory and figuring out what to borrow, what not, how to make it your own.
Yes.
And just the idea of like creating something new and putting out in the world.
Yes.
Like that is, I think, and also the music is wonderful. You can see in the show notes and all that. Just an example of just a student doing something novel using those 4 C skills.
Yes. So what we have been finding is that measuring those 4 C's, we can see it in its work, but measuring it has been challenging.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways or reasons why it's challenging is this lack of having standardized frameworks, right? The existing assessment systems often lack consensus on definitions and ways to evaluate the 4 C's. Like, it seems very easy to define, but in order to measure something, we have to be definitive about what it is and how we're going to measure it. And the 4 C's by definition of themselves are complex ideas, like what would go into creativity, right? And so that is a difficult thing to do. We have tried to do something of our own, right? So we tried to create these frameworks for 4 C's for ourselves as a district. But even that, I remember the conversations about what should go in, what should be creative. Is it the same? Does it change depending on if you're a kindergarten student versus whether you're a 12th grader? There's so many nuances that goes in that makes it really, really difficult. And because there is no one definitive way.
Right. Yeah. And it reminds me to some degree of, there's the economist Emily Oster. She writes a lot, parent data, a lot of this kind of stuff. And one of the things that she's kind of talked about with a lot of parenting advice, there isn't necessarily a definitive way of like this approach to sleep training versus this. A lot of the problems, it's more so just about kind of picking an approach and being consistent and not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. So that I can say, like in the show notes, you'll see these rubrics that were developed in that last strat plan. So feel free to use those with your PLC if that's helpful, because the key is doing something so students are getting that actionable feedback.
Right.
And they're able to grow, and we're able to collect some data about what's working, what's not working.
And then using them and defining them or refining them as needed, right? Because again, with everything else, this was done by a collection of folks, but it's not the totality of everybody. So again, you might look at it and like, oh, I think I need to tweak this way for this purpose or for, the students that you're using.
Yeah.
What's another challenge that you find when we're measuring 4 C's?
Just related, just that complexity of the assessment, because these are not discrete skills.
Yeah.
They're intertwined with each other, but they're also intertwined with other standards. You look at like the ELA standards, social studies standards, where it's about oftentimes communicating, expressing ideas and all those kind of things. So that question of how to measure independently, I think gets tricky. Yeah. And I'll drop in the show notes. There's this article or research that I think is useful. It's called A Critical Review of Assessments of Creativity in Education. And they kind of dive into this. And one of the things, they suggest a three-pronged approach of divergent thinking assessments. So assessments that are actually meant to measure this specifically. Student perception surveys, which we have in Wake County.
Okay, yeah.
And then also products with rubrics, which we just talked about. We have some resources that we can share. And that when you use each of those three, even though it's a little tricky, it allows you to give better feedback than if you did nothing at all. And that is hard, but I do think it's beneficial. That research, one of the things that they talked about is that compared with other traditional standardized assessments and measures, creativity assessments, and I think this applies to critical thinking, a lot of the 4 Cs, is more inclusive and can mitigate testing bias that has otherwise persisted along racial and gender lines.
Nice.
So I think there's value, even though, and probably because it's so tricky, because it's so organic and authentic, that it's worth doing.
Most definitely. So even though there are these challenges to measuring the 4 Cs, research has suggested some practices in ways you can integrate the 4 Cs into the curriculum, stating that the 4 Cs should not be something separate. So it's not something like you're going to walk into class and say, today we're going to do a lesson on communication, right?
Yeah, the 4 Cs teacher is handling it. You don't have to worry about it,
there's not going to be, that's not what it looks like. And so it has to be something that's integrated and woven into the subjects rather than treating it as something separate.
Yeah.
Right? And so it has to be interwoven into our curriculum and across disciplines to sort of promote this holistic kind of view of learning.
Yeah. And I think that's an advantage that we have in Wake County, in that I would argue that it is interwoven into pretty much all the curricula that I've kind of looked at.
Yeah.
EL, you have those performance tasks embedded into each module. Even like our math curriculum, Open Up and MVP oftentimes have these like put it all together kind of performance assessment too. Yep. You look through CMAP, there's a lot of like really rich assessments that require kids to use their creativity, their critical thinking, their communication, their collaboration. The question is whether that is explicitly taught and provided feedback,
right,
so that they can grow. Like, I'm thinking of, I don't know, if I'm learning how to play basketball, I can take 100 free throws, but if I'm shooting from like the left side of my head with my hands in the wrong position, just doing it a lot doesn't matter.
Right.
I need that formative assessment and summative assessment that says like, okay, do it this way. That was good. Tweak this, tweak that. And that's where I think, those rubrics can be helpful, and that intentionality and explicit approach.
So to help us kind of understand better how the 4 Cs are integrated into existing curriculum, we interviewed some students, because you probably get tired of hearing from Spencer and I. And so what we found is we found 2 examples of where the 4 Cs were integrated within the classroom structure. And then another example of where the 4 Cs was integrated outside of the classroom structure. Yep. So in the next episodes, you're going to hear from students and their experiences with the 4 Cs in both of those 2 settings.
I'm excited.
Stay tuned to the next 3 episodes around these 4 Cs, where we're going to, again, hear from students, as well as talk about, how those things can be integrated into the curriculum. We want to thank Leesville Road High School Will McIlerney for the theme music. It's, as Spencer mentioned, it's new, and so I think you're going to enjoy it, a little bit of difference. As always, you can reach us at www.wcpss.net/datalit. If you have any questions for us, you can email us at datalit@wcpss.net. And until next time, bye.
Take care.